When I try to invite somebody in, I try to think like I listen to the class and what the tone and the type of questions are in the class. And knowing Jamie's experience with the Navy and military and other work that you might mention that I know you're doing, it's felt like a really good fit for me for this group to basically bring some of the tougher questions we've been hearing or have been popping up and probably not all the way answered yet. And yeah, bring in another way to look at it and some more thoughts on it. So welcome, Jamie.
Thank you.
How should we start with an intro? Like how should we say hello first?
Sure.
What's KM for you?
Ooh, what's CAM for me? CAM is everything. CAM is just how I exist in the world. And I love telling that story about how the first time I formally learned about knowledge management, I was learning from a retired Army drill sergeant, Dr. Ken Rossi, who had worked at NASA. And, I was in a Master of Science in Information Systems program, and we had to take this course in knowledge management. And at the time, I was the director of web services for a university. So I was very heavy on the tech side, but also very heavy into let's navigate all these politics, because a website owned by a university, there's a lot of politics there. But I took this knowledge management class, and the first things I was learning, I was like, this is the worst class ever because everything about it just was common sense. It just sounded like, duh, of course we would do that. Of course, like, I don't understand. Why is this so difficult? And then probably less than a year later, I went to go work as a contractor for the Department of the Navy at Compact Fleet headquarters in Hawaii. And I learned really fast why knowledge management was a thing, because it's a lot harder for people to actually do than you realize. Some people just naturally get organization and why we might need to share and all those kind of things. I'm one of those people, but that's not true for everybody. So it became very apparent to me that, this knowledge management thing, this really is about teaching people how to navigate through the information they have, the information they share, the information they need. But it's about more than just the information. It's also about relationships and collaboration and trust and all of these, intangibles is what I'm used to calling them now, that we really don't think need tending to, but do. So, I realize knowledge management, and I'm sure for this group, knowledge management is a really wide range of stuff, and I'll probably talk about that later. But for me, it's a really large collection of things. And you've been learning from John, so I assume that you probably have recognized by now that it's a lot of different things, and that can seem overwhelming. But yeah, that's KM to me. It's a lot of different things.
Love it. So for our time together, I'm thinking, feel free to throw stuff in the chat, any questions or anything. I'm hoping to make this sort of conversational. We purposefully didn't do any slides or presentation stuff. So one of the questions, if I jump in first, if that's okay, one of the questions I've heard this week is people think they'll lose their job if they share. Like, my knowledge is my power, that kind of thinking. What can I do? How can I work with those people?
Yeah, I think that's a standard thing that I think every person who works in a knowledge management function comes across. And there's a few different things that could be going on there. Obviously, one is, the culture of the organization. How has that person, or how do people there see sharing do they see sharing being rewarded or punished, or, have they experienced leaders who really, value kind of the know-it-alls over the share-it-alls? It could also just be plain old personal insecurity. Some people might have lost touch maybe with what their own personal values are and what they understand their value to be in an organization. So, there's a lot to that. And I think that there are different ways that you can approach that, but all of them need to be very personalized to the person that you're dealing with. If it's an organization culture thing, that's a really hard thing, because usually, culture is fully driven by the leadership and what actions they're having, what are they showing to the organization. So, in that case, if you're in a position to, it's helpful to kind of work with the leadership and understand, what's going on. If there's a way for you to assess what's going on. One of the things I did in graduate school, a school I now teach at, is our group created what we called the collaboration coach for Nike Advanced Innovation. And Nike Advanced Innovation is probably a part of the company you don't really know anything about. And that's on purpose, because that's the unit of Nike that invents shoes and other technologies. So they've got all kinds of different people working in that part of the company, from shoe designers to engineers, to tech people. It kind of runs the gamut. And they all want to collaborate and share information differently. They also had very specific rules, kind of like the military. They had rules for what kind of information they could share with other groups, even inside their organization, because, of patents and all kinds of creative, issues. So the way we chose to approach it is not analyzing people for their personality types or things like that, but getting people to identify what kind of collaborator they are. And there was a model that we used. There's like 9 different collaboration types. And so you kind of had people do a little assessment. And then in the end, it sort of tells you, this is the kind of collaborator you are. And then when you're working with these other kinds of collaborators, this is what makes sense. This is how you could work well together. This is how you might not work well together. So I like that approach for getting people to share and framing it under the guise of collaboration, because then it's not personal, really. It's just them understanding, what is my style of sharing? And then sort of getting the rest of the organization to understand, oh, okay, like this is how different people work, and this is how we could work together. And, in a way, it influences the culture by framing sharing as collaborating, which I think resonates differently with a lot of people. So that's sort of my answer.
Love it. Thanks. Kay put one in chat. What are your tips for bringing knowledge retention to an organization?
Knowledge retention. This is always such an interesting conversation, because, knowledge retention, like, do you mean individuals being able to retain information, or do you mean the organization being able to retain information? And then do you also include using that information? So I guess it's a question to you, Kay. I don't know if you wanted to expand.
So I guess more or less for people that are retiring.
Okay.
Capturing the knowledge prior to their retirement.
Yeah.
Or them leaving in general. Yeah.
This is a good question. So I'll tell like a sort of a horror story, because I think people like those. And it is sort of related to the last question about fear of sharing. When I was working for Pacific Fleet, I was working at the headquarters. So I worked for the 4-star, and the first conference that we had of knowledge managers across the fleet, he was our keynote speaker, which I was very grateful for. And some of the attendees were people from the shipyard. And I don't know if you all are familiar with folks that have worked in shipyards, or you might work in a shipyard. But it's an interesting culture, right? And in Hawaii in particular, at that time, it was maybe like 3 or 4 years before a whole generation of shipyard workers were about to retire and leave the workforce. So of course, their team, which I think fell under business improvement or business analysis, they came to our CAM conference, and one of the people came up to me, and grown man, almost in tears, basically saying like, I don't understand, like, how did you get your 4-star admiral to support your knowledge management effort? He's like, I can't even at the shipyard get people to share their information. It's like literally people, and this was no joke, like people were literally burning their files because the attitude of the shipyard was, for some people, not all, was, I worked here for 40 years and I don't want some 20-year-old kid just picking up where I left off. Horrible, right? Like, on the one hand, you get it because people take pride in what they've done and what they own, but at the same time, awful for the organization, because if an entire generation of people with knowledge leaves, you're like, okay, you're done for. And in fact, the shipyard had quite a bit of problems because not only did people leave after a certain number of years, retired, but then there was a hiring freeze and they couldn't hire more people to come in. So it was a crazy situation. And the story I like to tell about how to get that kind of knowledge out is, knowledge managers are many things, I would say. And one of the things you are is champion, cheerleader, persuader of many. And, one of the best techniques that I've seen, I think it was used by Exxon, I want to say, which made sense because shipyard workers kind of similar vein, but I think it works for everybody, is this idea of setting things up as setting the scene as people who are leaving are masters. They're master craftsmen, they're master whatever they are. And so the idea is inviting people to have master classes, right? So recognizing the professional who's leaving as someone who's incredibly knowledgeable, so that kind of feeds ego for one, but it's also true. So you're not trying to deceive anybody here, but you really are, giving respect to people who really have a lot of knowledge and trying to get people to sort of have either fireside chat type conversations, which you can record, or, some kind of gathering where people, whatever format they feel comfortable sharing their knowledge, telling stories. So it's not about like, tell us everything you know. It's about, tell us what happened at this event. How did you guys handle this situation? Or, it's more about, I think you could see yourself as an anthropologist, which is convenient for me because that's my background. But you could, you see yourself as someone who's really, maybe you're writing a book in a way, think about it in your mind. And, you just want to collect stories. You just want people to be able to share what they experienced. And I think, again, framing it in that way really helps people feel more comfortable about sharing versus feeling like you're taking their intellectual capital. But yeah, that was something that worked really well.
Thanks.
I've got a comment on that because if you got the wherewithal in an organisation to actually have what I can call an expert lever framework, so you actually kind of define how you deal with it, and it's really good to to try and define that ahead of time. You've actually got this framework in place. When you bring people in, you help them understand that there is a framework for that. When people are, say, coming up to retirement age and those types of things, that they're fully aware of the framework. As Jamie said, bringing in people into the sort of the expert guru type role, and really capitalizing on communities of practice, and enabling the expert who's leaving to kind of just spread out everything into the community and just keep it rolling as you go. So actually, however that needs to be managed, just identifying that there's a need for a lever framework and actually writing down what that is and then rolling that out to the organization so everyone understands, so that there's not, as Jamie said, it's not this person wants to hold on to everything and doesn't want to give it to the 22-year-old. They're empowered to understand. An interesting phrase which always comes up that may not apply directly here, but there's always this phrase of what's in it for me. And certainly coming back to the initial question about fear of sharing due to various circumstances is about reciprocal advantage, about if I'm approached to share about a particular subject or topic, then I can expect and invite sharing the other way around. And I'd like to think about this, changing this what's in it for me, is which you hear all the time. It's even got its own WI, whatever,
With them.
with them, but what about what's in it for us? So this really comes back again to the beginning of the first question, which is about the management support and the management, which I got back from my KMI course years ago, which was the very first thing that was mentioned, was this clear and compelling vision, that's driven from the top. And it's a very open statement to say, we support you, we understand these things. So what's in it for us, and then building the frameworks and actually everyone understanding that they exist, and rather than like panicking at the last minute, can you write down everything you know in this spreadsheet? So yeah.
I love that. There are so many great things that you said, Steve. Like I love that you talked about the framework, because even, it's good to keep in mind that if you're capturing stories, if it's very true that we are good at capturing things in the military and probably not that good at retrieving them and using them. It's better to sort of, get yourself to a point where if you're capturing information, that it turns into something, be it a visualization of a framework, where storytelling is finer than that is that, and there's a beautiful video, and I wish that it was public, but I've never been able to find it. This idea that like when master musicians teach, there's a great example of how people can be very technical, like great technical piano players. John could probably relate to this, but a lot of the mastery, like what makes someone a master pianist, is their ability to emote and connect and kind of communicate something completely different than just the notes that they play. And that level of refinement and that sort of intangible thing is what really you're losing from the people who leave your organization, right? A lot of times it's not just the process that they created or the step-by-step things that they did. It's more the intrinsic knowledge that they have that's really hard to get, and it's easier to get out of stories. So, but it's important, to Steve's point, to make sure that you're capturing both that structure and process, but also the finer things that you don't get out of documents like frameworks. I love that you brought up the WIFM, because I think that I really wish like everybody would have that on their desk, because if you're engaging with anybody, especially as a knowledge manager, that's the best thing to think about is, like if you're engaging with someone, you definitely have to consider what is it in for them. If you're asking them to do something, participate, what's going to be of value to them. And then culture speaking, it is certainly ideal if you can do the what's in it for us, because I mean, my gosh, like that's like that would be like holy grail of behavior and culture in an organization, I think. So I loved all the points that you made. Thank you.
Joe's got 2 here in chat. See what you think about both of these. So we just did the debate of, is knowledge management more about people or is knowledge management more about technology? He's sort of reframed it, and I assume this is purposeful. When it comes to change management, is it more about people or is it more about technology? And he used the words of, is it more about systems or is it more about transformation? So that's one. And the other one, this one might be even more specific. Military COPs. Were you able to establish any? Were they successful? How did you know? Well, a couple of good ones there. What do you think?
Yeah. Okay. The first one, change management. What's more important, systems or transformation? I'm going to cheat and say both, because I mean, you can't, in change management, especially in today's organizations, you certainly can't separate one from the other, right? There's going to be a technology piece. You're going to be, trying to get people to transition to another system or a different way of using a system that exists, whatever it is, right? And that portion definitely needs to be looked at. And I think about, my last, when I was working recently as a consultant, there were 2 sort of things going on. It was, we were building a technology, but we were also very much tasked with getting people on board with, well, why do we need to use this technology in a different way? And, the thing that doesn't get discussed, I don't think enough in change management is that, I love this framing. It comes out of a book called The Way of Transition, which I think I got directed to because of John. And it's this idea that change is an event, right? A change happens. Like yesterday we were using this technology. Tomorrow we're using this one. Okay, it's a change, it's an event. But what actually is happening with the people involved is that they're going through a transition, and transition is actually a phased series of events. There are 3 phases in transition. One is transitioning out of the state that you were in of, hi, I was a user of this system before, and I used to do things this way. And then there's this sort of ambiguous phase in the middle where you're in between, leaving that state of I was doing this. And then the 3rd phase is, okay, I have now fully moved on to doing the new thing I'm supposed to do. Important to understand that unlike change that happens like this, transition for human beings could happen like this. It could happen like this. It could take forever. It could take a really long time. And so, the art there in what you do is, recognizing that while you're managing a very time bound project that might have to do with, installing this technology or whatever the case might be, the transition part is a lot more unwieldy and probably deserves more of your attention, I would say, than, when it comes to the people, than just the technology piece. Because there's a lot of certainly, helping people, ushering people through transition of change, involves a lot. It involves some of the what's in it for me, making sure people understand what's the value to them if they're going to be changing from one thing to another. It's a lot of reassurance that, this is how this is going to benefit us. This is how it's going to benefit you. This is, this is what's going to happen. And then, and reassurance as in like, we got you covered and supported on the other end. Because if you are in a position of knowledge management, leadership, or something relative to that in your organization, and you're not a contractor that is going to leave anytime soon, I think you have the benefit of being a part of that organization and being able to say to people that you're there to continuously support. And I think, people take that for granted a lot, but sometimes people that are struggling with transition and change just want to know someone's going to be there to help them if it gets difficult. So that's my answer to the change management. It's both. I do lean always more toward people, caring more about people, because that's who, you can't do any of these things without people. So that's that one.
So we talk about, change, and, really, I suppose we could be talking about cultural change. And, for change to happen, I always say this to people, if we want things to change, then we have to change. So it comes down to behavioral change as well. So I think, again, the sort of the clear and compelling vision that says, we want to be at this end point in the future. We want to have made this change, enables everybody to understand that there is a change that is required, and then to support, as you said, is to support that change. So, and to help everyone understand that, but you can't, well, you're not being asked to stay the same. You are being asked to change, but that's got to be supported through all levels in the organisation. We can't have one management line deciding to stay the same, and another management line deciding to embrace different methods, for example. It has to be a cultural change throughout the whole organisation. And just to make it clear is that the guidelines have been given, and it's been true with experience, is that a cultural change is not going to happen in by going to Google or Amazon or someone, for a digital transformation, for example. A cultural change is on the 3-5 year timescale, and the people who are sponsoring that change must understand that.
Yep, and I think you brought out a good point that I'll emphasize too, and I love it because Larry Prusak, I don't know if you've done a lot of knowledge management reading. Larry Prusak to me is kind of he's like the, other than maybe Stan Garfield and Larry Prusak, they're sort of like the fathers of modern knowledge management. But I have the pleasure of working with Larry now at Columbia, and he he's very clear on the fact that anytime you ask someone to collaborate or work with you, a part of themselves changes. And so when Prusak, Prusak, but if you really think about that, and how that's different from just, you're exchanging information, something something about a person and something about you changes when you engage, when you share information, when you collaborate on something. That can be really scary for people. Just, I'll put that out there, and that's ultimately sometimes why people don't want to collaborate or change or share, is that they inherently recognize, even though they may not consciously recognize, that they're being asked to really like move something about themselves, something they believe, some way they behave, whatever. It's kind of it was a simple statement that he made, but to me it's very deep. But I will answer the question about military. So when I was working with the military, were we able to establish communities of practice? So when I got there, which was in 2006, Commander United States Pacific Fleet, which is in Pearl Harbor, they had already had several knowledge management officers who were in uniform in place. And I was brought on by one of those knowledge management officers in uniform to work as the lead knowledge management support person as a contractor. And, but mainly I was brought in to help manage a system called Enterprise Knowledge, or Enterprise Knowledge Management, or EKM. And it was basically, a content management system that existed both on the unclassified and classified side. It was really cool. It wasn't the most the sleekest of things, but the way that system was built was around the concept of communities of practice. So system-wise, what we did, we had communities of practice and we had communities of interest. And so for years, the organization had already been thinking of, okay, we're organizing ourselves by a community of practice is all the people that kind of do the same thing I do. So they're all the people in whatever directorate. In the Navy, it's, let's say N1, which is personnel. It's all the people that work in N1. We all are HR professionals. So that's our community of practice. But then sometimes we, the HR people, we make things that are relevant and helpful to people outside of our organization, our community of practice. So that's going to be our community of interest. So the way that we organize documents in that system was by community of practice, communities of interest. People could, move in and out of a community of interest, for example. So then when it came time to actually creating communities of practice with people that were, getting together and meeting for certain things, it was a lot easier for us to introduce that terminology to people. And I would say that not every part of the organization and I think this is true of all organizations, not every community of practice that was set up was active or really put a lot of effort into their community. It really just depended on what, again, going back to what do they need it for? What if there was a purpose for a community of practice to really get together and share things, then it worked, right? Because they were driven by something very specific. If it was just hey guys, we're just sharing stuff with one another, well, then it wasn't so active. Maybe there were one or two people in a community of practice who would just be really great at sharing stuff and everybody would know about it. And then but I would say for the knowledge management community, what was interesting back then, so I started as a contractor, and then 2 years later, I was hired as the first GS civilian knowledge management officer, I think for the Navy, because they didn't have billets for it back then. And, when that happened, it was really important to me. My goal as a knowledge management officer was to not just address the people in our building, but the people in the whole fleet. And so if you're not familiar with the structure of the Navy, half of the United States Navy exists in the Pacific. And that's literally from all, the West Coast of the United States all the way to, elsewhere in the Pacific, right? Japan and that whole area. So, we had physical distance between us. We were a fully virtual team. This was my team of people that were working with me, but we also had people that we relied on in other commands that were part of the whole entity that was the Pacific Fleet. So we had to create a community of practice of just us, like the practitioners. And oh, by the way, they weren't all people who did knowledge management all the time. A lot of them were collateral dutied. They were information professional or IP officers who were mostly tech folks. So it was really important to me that our community of practice was very active and very much, included everybody. And, I made a trip out to every major site, including ships every year, just to make sure that whoever was working in a knowledge management capacity saw us and knew that they were supported and relied upon. So all of that is very possible in the military. It just kind of depends on who your leadership is, how much they support you, and how active you're going to be at setting up those communities of practice. And then I'll throw in as a bonus that John and I met like 11 years ago or 12 years ago on Twitter. And that was way back in the day when nobody was using Twitter just yet. It was me going, there's this cool thing, because I just come out of working at a university. And of course, that's, university at the time was the only place you could use Facebook and things like that. So when I got to the Navy, Twitter was there, and I was like, okay, I am a knowledge management person on a small island. There aren't knowledge management people here. Who's doing this thing? And I happened to reach out on Twitter and see who was out there. And then that's really how I connected with John. And then by magic, he was attending a conference that I was speaking at in San Antonio, Texas. And that was the first time I met him in person. And then the second time I ever met him in person was 2 years ago, which is crazy to me. But I'm throwing that out there because communities of practice, I don't want you to think of it limit yourself to who is in these communities, especially you as a practitioner. In the military, same could be true, just geographically thinking, but expanding your understanding of who belongs in your community of practice, I think, is a really important thing, not limiting yourself.
Did people volunteer to join those communities in the Navy?
They did. Okay. They did, but again, the WIFM was I worked at a higher level command in the structure. So I think it would have been harder if I was a person who was down in the structure going, I think we all need to get together. I worked at the lead headquarters. So of course, people were interested because whatever we did there, for example, we created the first knowledge management instruction, Navy instruction. We had the ability to do things like that then influenced the whole rest of the fleet. So of course it behooved you to want to be a part of that kind of stuff, right? Because you wanted your say, and it was something you could take to your leadership in your organization and say, hey, this is stuff that these people are doing, so we should be doing it too. So there was definitely a what's in it for them. No question.
One big one that I've seen, we use this, Miro. So we're using Miro to do Post-it notes and lots of stuff. And a couple of Post-it notes this week have been kind of what you said, but maybe I'll just ask it back to you. There's a lot of pieces in knowledge management. Mm-hmm. How have all of these disparate psychology, sociology, anthropology, IT, diversity and inclusion, each one of those is huge. How's it come together? Let alone if I just communities of practice, communities of interest, expertise location, knowledge cafes, value network analysis, even just in KM, there's 1,000 tools. How do you do it? How did you make sense of all this stuff?
I think the number one way that you make sense of all that stuff is never, ever, ever starting anything without knowing what matters to the people who are in charge and the people that you're serving. That's number one, because you could go all kinds of different directions and care about all kinds of different things. But the fact of the matter is, especially in knowledge management, what's going to matter most is how are you helping people solve their problems, and how are you helping the important people solve their biggest problems, right? If you first and foremost listen, read, pay attention to what are the priorities of your organization and your leadership, and look at how you, from a knowledge manager's perspective, can solve problems or contribute to solving those problems, you will find yourself in a much greater, better position than you could ever imagine. It worked for me over and over and over again, even with people who for whatever reasons, they hated the idea of knowledge management. They didn't want to talk to the knowledge manager, but hey, I have a problem. And if I, as the knowledge manager, or my team could help them solve the problem, well, suddenly they were okay with knowledge management. They thought it was a great idea. But I actually, do you mind if I share something, John? Because I do have something on my screen. I'm looking at it right now because I was downloading it for something else. Let me share this. So I don't know if John shared this before, but I'm sure he's very familiar with Nancy Dixon. I don't know if you've heard of Nancy Dixon, but when I was working for the Navy, I met her at an Army knowledge management conference in Fort Leavenworth, and I actually recommended her book to Kay, Company Command. She wrote it a long time ago, but I also now work at Columbia with Nancy. But she had a more rudimentary version of this 3 knowledge eras diagram, but I like the newer version better. I'm sure she has a more updated one, but and I couldn't find it. I was looking for it. But to give you to validate the what do we deal with in knowledge management, there's a lot of stuff on the side. If you look at everything on the bottom, this basically what this shows is that in the beginning of knowledge management in 1995, those things in the red, those were the things we were mostly focused on, information management. And then, in the 2000s, we started working more on leveraging implicit and tacit knowledge. And then, now, and into the future, we're talking about leveraging collective knowledge, right? And there's all the bottom are all these little things that we as knowledge management professionals might deal in, okay? It doesn't mean that you have to be doing any of these. You might be doing just some of these or using one of these, whatever it is. But it's important, I think, for you to know as a knowledge management, certified knowledge manager, that there's a whole lot of stuff that could be incorporated in knowledge management. But back to my original point of, how do you figure out which ones you need to focus on? You must figure out what the problems are in your organization and what they care about. And then kind of like I don't know, a chef, you're figuring out what ingredients do we need here in our organization? What of these things, and then there are other things, by the way, but this is just a good visualization. But what of these things do we really need at our organization? What do we need to do, implement, use, care about in order to solve the problems? And I'm going to stop sharing this because I want to make sure I see everybody. But I'll send that link, by the way, John. But I know that we're at the time, so I guess I just want to say with that is I fully and completely understand where you are, whether you're an IT person that's just being tasked to do a SharePoint thing, or you're a person who's been suddenly made a knowledge management officer and you're in charge of, half the United States Navy's knowledge. Whatever it is, I've definitely been there and done that. And when I was most successful in my career was when I was listening, and I was less concerned about defending the practice of knowledge management. It's hard because, knowledge managers are interesting creatures. We have to be in the business of being seen when it's important, and we need to be in the business of not being seen when it's important. And, I very much learned that through a lot of trial and error, working with really important people who knew much more than I did about things. But, what I did know is people and how to care about what people really care about the most and attach my work to what they did. So for us, it wasn't really about hey, let's make knowledge management important in this organization. It's let's make what's important in this organization. Let's make what's important to knowledge management in this organization, what's important to the organization, and work that way. Because if all you're doing is spending time telling people how amazing you are as a knowledge manager, or knowledge management is the best thing since sliced bread, nobody is going to care. What they care about is, hey, you know what, Kay, just help me figure out how to get this stupid thing fixed or solved, or now I know how to find things, or now I know who I need to talk to. And those are your gold as a knowledge manager. The more problems you can solve, you don't even need to have to talk about them. Other people will talk about them for you. I've seen it happen over and over again. So yeah, but it's a lot. it's a lot to be a knowledge manager because you're constantly going in and out of these modes of be seen, don't be seen, is the way I like to put it. And that is a skill that you have to develop with experience and time. And I think you're well on your way to doing that with this certification from KMI and learning from John, who to me is one of the best of the best. So
amazing. Thank you, Jamie.
Yeah.
Should we do
Can I quote you on that? Knowledge managers need to be seen when it's important and not being seen when it's important. That's brilliant.
See it on Twitter in minutes. All right. Well, huge thank you from me. I'm sure if anybody wants to follow up or send other questions, I'll just text you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I would love it. And I'm on LinkedIn. Definitely feel free to connect there. I'm always happy to answer questions about, because, you know, there's so many of us going through this process. I don't technically consult on knowledge management anymore, but I do. I'm a social innovation consultant. But I will forever and ever be incorporating knowledge management into what I do for a living. So happy to help.
Amazing. Thank you for your time and brilliance and being here. And I guess for everybody, let's do 55-minute break and come back at 1 o'clock Eastern, top of the hour.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks,
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.